Namaste to everyone. It's 1 minute past 10 and we have people streaming in. So I think we should start in a minute if Harikiranji says so. Is that okay? We have about 21 people right now. Should we get started, Hariji?
Yeah, we just give a few more minutes. Pranams, Gauriji.
Hari Om all.
Namaste, Gauri ma'am.
We'll just start in a few minutes. We'll just wait for Sunday morning. So. Yeah, I think we can start.
Okay. Namaste.
Good morning, friends. Very, very happy to welcome you all for this open house discussion and to celebrate the launch of Indica Classical Library. This is a new initiative by Indica Academy, and I'm not sure whether to call this a momentous initiative or not, whether we have the right to call self-aggrandize and say, okay, this is a momentous occasion. But I want to take that call and say it is because of certain reasons, it has gained that nature of what should have been a normal thing, an important thing for a civilization such as ours. It has gained a dimension of Atmanirbhar or Atma Gaurav, like self-respect, not just self-independence, but self-respect. If you see the history of classical libraries that have been established worldwide, the first one was set up sometime in the 19th century, in 1867 or something like that. And this was set up by a person called John Loeb. And this classical library, Loeb Classic Library, as it is called now, was focused on Greek and Latin literature. The second one that was set up in the 90s was the Clay Sanskrit Library. This was set up by John Clay, and he had wanted to do 50 volumes. Finally, he did 56 volumes. And the third one that was set up a few years back is the Murthy Classical Library. And today, in the year 2021, we are setting up the fourth classical library, which is the Indica Classical Library. So this is from what my little research I have done, is that there are 4 classical libraries in the world 1 dedicated to Greek and Latin, and 3 dedicated to Sanskritam and books from Bharat. Now, why is it that this was not done in greater number? And why is it so important for us today, given our mission? I would say that there are 3 requirements for a good classical library. We need good bilingual translators. We need a good curator and a publisher, a good editing and good curator. And then we need a sponsor. So there are 3 elements to this thing: sponsor, curator, and translator. So for a successful library, classical library to be successful, it is my proposition that all 3 should be indigenous to the land. And unless all these 3 are indigenous to the land, the thought of the indigenous people will not resonate, because it will not respect the tradition. It will be an outsider's perspective. That's why in our purpose statement, we say the translator should belong to this region in thought, word, and deed. Not only the translator, but the curator and the sponsor. All 3 have to be belonging to that tradition in thought, word, and deed. I believe that with great emphasis at my command, that Indica Classical Library is the only classical library that satisfies the criteria of all the 3 people being indigenous to this land. And I'm very, very grateful to Ishvara, to Bhagavan, that this thing is happening through this platform of Indica Academy. A lot of sponsors are well-intended, they have good intentions, but they may, due to ignorance, commit some mistakes, and we have seen that in the past. Fortunately, this initiative, the way it has happened, it fulfills that criteria and the purpose which Meg will talk about. We did not set out to set up an Indica Classical Library. That was not, when we set out in 2015, this was not a part of our design. But as we kept doing things, the feedback and the rapid prototyping formula that we have gave us ideas and the need. We started a relationship with KSRI, an institution that was set up in 1945 by Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, great luminaries. We started a relationship with them a few years back to translate and bring out critical editions in certain texts. And this when we were reviewing our relationship with KSRI and trying to understand what else can we do, how can we work together to increase our productivity, they gave us a list of the texts of yoga and Vedanta. And this is just Bhagavan flowing through. This is nothing, it just struck me that the work that we are doing in terms of these translations and bringing out these critical editions, perhaps the time has come for us to set up a classical library. And immediately, yes, we should And then Meg came to the mind, because you see, Meg is a very calm, objective, very detached kind of a scholar. Very there's a particular demeanor whom you have interacted, and in the way he writes mellifluously, I felt that he's the right person for this job, and I reached out to him. Would you want to come on board? And he readily agreed. And lo and behold, we are here. And I personally believe that this evolution that we are going through, and this inflection point that we are in, this is a defining moment. I would say that today, the launch of this Indica Classical Library is a defining moment of the people who are indigenous to the nation, indigenous to a land, taking back the narrative and defining for themselves what they meant, not somebody else defining what we meant. We have created a very interesting logo, because there's this discussion about what is classical, and what is the cutoff date for the beginning of classical, what is the ending date for beginning of classical. So there's this question of what is classical. Timeless is what the intuition that I say, that it is relevant at any point in time. Perpetual. Now, this could be a definition for Greek and Latin also. The value of it in the contemporary times also. But one very interesting thing about our scriptures is that we transcend time. We define timelessness. You see, this is the beauty. So timelessness is embedded in our scriptures. Understanding timelessness, understanding how to transcend time. So therefore, our approach to this whole thing is that every aspect of our scriptures is timeless. Not just a particular cutoff date of 2 BCE, or every aspect is timeless. And we try to capture that in this logo that we have designed, inspired by, in my childhood, I was inspired by a book which treats mathematics, music, and graphic design. There's a very famous book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach. So Bach's music, if you hear, there's a very certain precision in the way he and then, so this book talks about the intersection of these three. And then I just resonated, because I'm a great fan of Escher, and I've got his prints and other things. And his entire thing, if you look at his documentary itself is Journey to Infinity. So his entire work is about metamorphosis. It's about perpetuity, perpetual motion, and all that. So I was just struggling with that idea, saying that let's look at Escher. And sure enough, Escher has created the 3 knots, his work on knots. And from that, we recreated that to put our classical books. And the way the knot structure is in terms of the past, the present, and the future. And the intersection is the timelessness. And again, going back to the sponsor, the curator, and the translator, all 3 belonging to the indigenous. So with that, I want to showcase to you our logo once. Koti, can you just show the logo? Yes. So this is the thing. So you can see all those leather bound. Yeah, you can just share. Yeah. And this is perpetual, is perpetuity. So we are talking about classics. We're talking about timeless books. We're talking about books which make you understand timelessness. And therefore, this is the concept behind, this is the philosophy behind our Indica Classical Library. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I commend to you my friend Meg Kalyan Sundaram, the curator and the director in charge of ICL. I would request him to take over the proceedings. Thank you so much.
Om Shri Guru Pyo Namaha. Namaste to everybody. Thank you so much, Hari Kiranji, for setting the stage up so well and giving me this opportunity to connect with the audience that we have today. I'd like to begin with a small dedication to a couple of our knowledge systems in Sanskritam through a small song. Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Kamarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddhim Bhavatu Me Sada Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Padam Shankaram Lokashankaram Purana Nyaya Mimamsa Dharmashastranga Mishritaha Vedaha Sthanani Vedyana Dharmasya cha Chaturdasha Ayurvedo Dhanurvedo Gandharvaschaiva te Trayaha Arthashastram Chaturtantu Vidyaha Ashtadashaivataha Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you. So this song actually included two verses, one from the Agnivalkya Smriti and the other from Vishnu Purana, attesting both Chaturdasha Vidya and Ashtadasha Vidya, frameworks of knowledge systems which are indigenous and attested in our texts, which is but a natural starting point for Indica Classical Library, while we won't remain limited to it, but it is definitely a starting point. Now, one of the points that Hari Kiranji mentioned while he opened was he alluded to the purpose and he said I would get into it. So let me start off right away with that. Now, this purpose statement is there on our website. Some of us might have seen it, some of us might not have seen it. So it would be worth spending just a couple of minutes to go through that verbatim so that all of us are on the same page. So our statement is, quote, we aspire to be a trusted platform for faithful, decolonized translations of classical texts indigenous to Bharata. I'll repeat the first line. We aspire to be a trusted platform for faithful, decolonized translations of classical texts indigenous to Bharata. We hope to do this by engaging with bilingual scholars who are indisputably rooted in our heritage, in thought, word, and deed. We seek to publish new facing page and revise existing translations of Indic textual masterpieces across time. So this is the purpose statement that we have given ourselves. This is available on our website. Of these three statements, I think Hari Kiranji already touched upon the first two quite elaborately, which is in terms of having faithful decolonized translations, engaging bilingual scholars. I'll just spend a moment on the two streams of work, which is part of the third statement, being new facing page translations and revising existing translations. Now, these are the two streams that we see our work coming in. Now, when we say new facing page translations, what do we mean by that? We mean on the left side, you would have an Indic language, which could be Sanskritam or any other language indigenous to Bharata. And on the right side, you would have its translation, right? So that's what we call a facing page translation. And new facing page translations would ideally be ones where Preferably, the text has never been translated before, but has a very high narrative value, right? Or it has been translated before, but not fully. So there are certain criteria, and these will evolve over time. So that is the new facing page translation. The other category is revising existing translations. And this is an area that we have thought of in order to increase the efficiency given the resource constraints that is quite natural to the kind of enterprise that we are taking on. It's not that we are sitting on endless amounts of cash, and it's not that we have a line of scholars who are waiting to sign up and who might be capable to actually execute on these aspects. So revising existing translations attempts to take up existing translations, which might be substantially okay, or even a fair amount of it might be okay, but portions of it might not be from an insider lens, something that is palatable to an insider scholar. So in this stream, what we would do is identify the portions which appear problematic when an insider scholar reviews it and publish their original translations of the problematic aspects, which then becomes a complement to the text and the translation that they originally studied. So through this, in revising it, so what we are doing is not reinventing the wheel where stuff might actually already be okay, but also provide the necessary correction so that when these two are taken together, people will have access to something which is fairly from an insider point of view, right? So these are broadly the two streams of work: new facing page translations and revising existing translations. So with that, that's the purpose statement, and that's what we hope to set out. We're glad to say that in the first month of our existence, we already have 3 projects signed up. 2 are on the website already, and the third one was signed up literally yesterday. So it's not yet on the website, and they involve Arthashastra, they involve the Natya Shastra, and they also involve Yaskar's Nirukta. Now, on Yaskar's Nirukta, I want to spend a minute to kind of specify one of our differentiations from some of the libraries that currently exist. If you look at one of the recently launched libraries, I don't want to name it, it focuses on India as well. Many good aspects about it, but there's a very interesting mention in their introduction. And I say interesting in the British sense of interesting, because it actually says, and I'll read this out verbatim, it says, what we know as Indian literature today is constituted by multiple languages, each of them drawing from a vast pool of literary practices. The great sources of this pool are the Sanskrit tradition, beginning in the first centuries of the first millennium BCE. Now, this is explicitly mentioned in the definition of what constitutes Indian literature in the classical library. Note this again, beginning in the last centuries of the first millennium BCE. Last centuries of first millennium BCE would roughly be 200 BC, let's say 250 BC, maximum 300 BCE. So where would a Yaskar's Nirukta fit in? Now, by most conventional, even by the status quo dating of Yaskar's Nirukta, we are looking at a 500 BCE text. So by this definition of classical, Yaskar's Nirukta would not fit in their library at all. But I can't imagine a classical library of Bharata without the Yaskar's Nirukta, without the text which is the world's oldest extant text dealing with etymology plus. It's really a polythematic text, right? So this is just to give you one example of the constraints that we are not imposing on ourselves, which could have other ideological motivations. And as Hariji correctly mentioned, being timeless in terms of how we look at Bharata. Another point that I would like to emphasize before bringing on and inviting our luminaries, our advisory board members, is the aspect that while we are starting with Sanskritam, we are not going to be limited only to Sanskritam. We are open to languages which are indigenous to Bharata and texts which have been composed in Bharata. Now, these could be in any language, but naturally we would try to complement the existing system, and we would work with the kind of resources that we might have access to So that will evolve over time. Now, with this, I hope at least our purpose, in which our streams of work, our existing signups thus far, and how we see classical is clear. With this, I'd like to kind of now invite our advisory board members to share their views when they first heard about this and how they feel about this, because it's an open house, before we proceed to taking some questions from people who have joined us today. Before doing that, I'd like to thank the people who made this session possible at the back end, Srinivas ji, Vade Srinivas ji, and Koti ji, who've spent many hours to make sure that we are organized and we are able to have this conversation. So thank you so much, both of you. Now, I'd like to invite Gauri Mahulika ji first. After that, Sushumna Kannan ji, then Professor Kurada Subramaniam ji, followed by, I don't know if Madhusudan Penna ji is here today, but if he's not here, then Ramesh Rao ji, then Nagaraj Paturi ji. We'll go in that order, and then we'll open it out to others. Thank you.
Thank you, Meg ji, and congratulations on this launch. Congratulations to the entire team and the brain behind this Indica Classical Library. The need of that classical library was there right from that Murthy Classical Library. There were so many controversies and this and that. So it's a very timely step. I must congratulate you on that. And as Meg rightly said, Nirukta, it would have been thrown out if because it doesn't fit into that that definition. And it's not only 500, it should be much before that, because 500 BC we normally assign to Panini, and therefore Yaska is definitely a predecessor. And what to talk about Shakapuni and Shakatayana and others whose works we don't have in full. But because Nirukta is one of my favorites too, I'm so happy that Nirukta has been, a contract has been signed for Nirukta as well. And that too under the able guidance of Kurada ji, Professor Kurada ji. So I'm very happy for that. And secondly, two faculty of our own Chinmay Vishwavidyapit have signed up for the Arthashastra translation, especially the revised portion in the first phase. And then, I think March 22 is their deadline for submitting some revised portion now, and then March 23 for the second phase. And both are very excited, and one comes from Sanskrit, the other comes from law and public policy. So I think they made a good combination for this. So at this moment, unless we have some revised translations in front of us, we really can't evaluate and how indigenous in our word, action, and thought we are, that can't be evaluated right now. So I think some time has to pass, and we must have some literature produced before us so that we can review, evaluate, assess, and then can really boast of being indigenous in the truest sense of the term. So with this, I think I'll pass it on to the next speaker, because this is too early for me to say anything about the project now. Okay.
What you just said was absolutely what we require. Thank you so much, Gauriji. And thank you for keeping us in check in terms of how we should look at it and evaluate it. Now I'll invite Sushumna ji to share her views.
I'm deeply honored to be here. This is so exciting for me. The language that I know very well is Kannada, not Sanskrit. And so I hope that we will dig some texts out from Kannada that are crucial for us, in the sense that as practicing Hindus, as those of us who are engaged in the project of decolonization, but also more importantly, I'm amazed by the intertextuality that is there in the Indian traditions, texts and traditions, and I was wondering how we could bring that out. That and the fact that the Vedas are what we interlocute with, that the regional language traditions are always interlocuting with the Vedas, that fact might not have been noticed as much by other classical libraries. I think that we must notice that. That the Vedas are what we are always speaking with or speaking against, no matter what we are doing. And I'm also amazed by how there are shared terminologies between the philosophical schools and other thought movements that were born in India, and how it's important to clarify how the same set of terms are used differently in different traditions, and yet they all kind of also come together in so many different ways. So I'm really excited. Congratulations for this wonderful project.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those words. And it's lovely to have you. And like we said, we are not focused only on Sanskritam. So Sushumna ji presents that aspect of this library from point of view of advisory boards. And we hope that this would grow over time and include other languages as well. Wonderful to have you. Thank you so much. Now I'll invite Mahamahopadhyay Kurada Subramaniam ji, who has been guiding us through this process informally, formally, blessing us in many ways to share his views on this project. Thank you.
Namaste. Actually, this is too late to have started such a. I congratulate Harikaranji and Megha and others because this is expected long ago. There is not any specific library like this. And the second thing is, as far as the translation is concerned, there are not many translators who have got a good command upon the both the languages. That is the source language and the target language, and also the command upon Vyakarana and other Shastras is also very limited. But we can help them in doing these things, and we may just suggest to the translators wherever there are terms which are pregnant with meaning, which are tests, they may offer some meaning in parentheses or footnotes or endnotes, because terms like yoga, punyam, which do not have a one-to-one. I worked in a translation center and guided some translations of PhD and MPhils. So I have some knowledge of these things. Anyway, everybody knows that it is not possible to bring out the entire meaning, except expect the especially the cryptic meaning that is there behind the expressions that are there across the different systems of Indian philosophy. It may be Vedanta, maybe Vyakarana, anything. But we have to go ahead. There is no other go, because we have to see that this is spread across the globe, and people at large should know what is there, and that it will be actually a very good effort and a synergy, rather than it is not confined to any particular individual, or nobody expects any kind of glory or anything from this, but it is our dharma. Simply, that's all. There is no room for discussion. We have to save, we have to propagate, we have to protect our values. And today, before us, we see what is happening across the world, since the tenets of our Vedas, Shastras, etc., are simply neglected and put on back burner, and the result we see today. So at least now we have to wake up and wake people, see that the original values are here, embedded in our systems. Maybe Ayurveda, maybe Arthashastra, Vyakarana, Mahabharata, whatever it may be. Every single system of Indian philosophy is great and valuable. We have to tell the people at large that they should not expect these treatises on a par with those which are being authored by people across the globe. Although we don't want to downplay their scholarship or their argument, but here they should know that these works are done by rishis who have got yogi pratyaksham. Without yogi pratyaksham, today's date of Mahabharata war, it can be decided only through yogi pratyaksham. Time and again, I have been happy on this subject. So, through yogi pratyaksham, once it is done, you cannot deny Panini, you cannot deny Sushruta. And you are using the plastic surgery, the same other things also. I don't want to take much time. So, this is a very good start, and I will extend all my help as long as it is possible for me. And Dhanyavada, thank you very much. Shubham Bhuyat.
Thank you so much, Professor Subramaniam. When you say things like you will extend all possible help, that really puts a lot of strength beneath our wings. So we will be reaching out to you, and we hope to be able to draw from your well of wisdom in shaping this as we can go forward. Now I'll request Ramesh Rao ji, who I must say is so dynamic and so he's kind of a step ahead of us in certain aspects, as we were in the last month also building things. I don't want to get into the details, but Ramesh Rao ji, with those words, I'd invite you to kind of share your views on this.
Namaste, namaskara. I'm also a Kannadiga. So Kannadiga now in Columbus, Georgia. And it is indeed an exciting day, a momentous day. And as I have expressed to Meg, I am an uncomfortable interloper in this group. Because my training, my life has taken me places very far away, in fact, from our traditions. But then I was born in Rosapete, Ramanagara in Karnataka. I cannot therefore distance myself from those roots. I am rooted, but have traveled very different places. So with that trepidation, I still, am excited to be part of this group. I think I know a little bit about the kinds of challenges that this classical library initiative will face. And having taught in American universities for the last 30 years, I think I can bring a little bit of those kinds of knowledge, experience that will help enable some scholars who may need that kind of support to make that transition from that kind of traditional learning and speaking and writing and their interlocutory habits. Because I think the big challenge for us living now as we do is about this whole thing about insiders and outsiders. In a way, every group, every project that I am in, I tell them I am an outsider trying to look in. Because after 35 years here, and again here, just in terms of the language that we are using, there are so many aspects that Sushumna ji herself also kind of alluded to, that brings about, it's both a challenge and an opportunity. And once again, Hari Kiran is a man on a mission, many missions, a million missions now. Which again, we need those kinds of, I hate to use the word sponsor, but that kind of energy to enable these kinds of projects to take shape, to bear fruit. And with people like Professor Subramaniam, Professor Malukarji, it is, and I think there is already that substance there. But then again, as Professor Subramaniam said, do we have the scholars who are both trained in these systems and in these languages, but who also have a facility in English so that they can really contribute, make this classical library worth visiting and becoming a part of? So whatever I can do in my very limited abilities, I would be, this is a privilege for me, and I'm so honored to be here. And with that, Once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Trust me, we will be coming to you for sure. there's no two ways about it. You've been very humble in the way you. I really don't want to get into the details of how much he's contributed just in the last 1 month. But we foresee certainly engaging further on with you in many ways. Now, I'd like to invite Senior Director of Indica Academy, person whom most of us, if not all of us, would know over here, who is in many ways the driving force, who's in many ways who brought so many of us together, Nagaraj Paturiji. I'll invite him to kind of share his views, and then we will, if Vinayak is there, then we would like to get a view of one of the scholars who's actually joined up to signed up to actually take one of these projects. So get his views and then open up to questions. Nagaraji, over to you.
Yeah, I'm able to see Altansji also here. Altansji, will you please give your views also?
I'm here, Nagaraji.
Yeah. Please switch on your video and please share
It
your
may
views.
not be very presentable. It's late night, but okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Please.
namaste.
Yeah. Please share your views.
Oh, I'm not. I'm just happy to be here, and it's a wonderful thing to do. We need a translation. We know that a lot of translations have been done, which are not necessarily. It's hard to translate. I'm a linguist, and I know it's always hard to translate. It is hard to stick to the originality, and there are a lot of logistics, and we see the problem all the time. And I'm happy that it will be done from our perspective, not just in terms of ideology and all, but I also know that we have some very capable scholars who will be doing it and will be true to as true as possible to the text and its meaning. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Avatansi. Over to you, Nagaraji.
Yeah. Okay. So now the panel you're able to see is well balanced. We have Mahamohapradhyaya, Professor Korada Subramaniam Garu, deeply rooted in our Sanskrit traditions and Shastras, and equally Professor Gauri Mahulikarji, Vidushi, Vidwan and Vidushi balance here. There was a discussion on some forums whether Vidushis are being encouraged into Sanskrit or not. We have a live example. Actually, in that forum I was sharing that we nowadays have a bigger number of Vidushis than Vidwans in Sanskrit. In all the university admissions, there are more Vidushi admissions. 80% of the admissions are Vidushi admissions, and she is a pioneer in this, mastering almost all the Shastras, and she is with us, giving Hindu feminine perspective apart from her deep-rooted traditional scholarship. And Professor Korad Subramaniam ji equally is a Sarvadarshana Sangraha himself. He Sakala Shastra Parangata. People are able to see that. And we have the communication veteran, Ramesh Rao Garu, and we have another young woman scholar giving Hindu feminine perspective. Her articles on countering contemporary feminism from an insider feminist perspective are amazing, rigorous articles that I have seen. And actually she probably forms a model for all the contemporary insider feminist perspective. Actually, she needs to train people. She needs to create the next generation similar to her from that perspective. And so that on the modern side, on the traditional side, this panel is well balanced now. And we have an able leader, uh, Megji, who is known, actually, Harikiranji, when he identifies people for tasks, he locates it so exactly that we have been watching Megji passionate about books and books and books all the time, and how the books have to come into existence from a traditional perspective in English. Mostly the books he used to share are from English. And when the word classical library was suggested by Sri Harikiranji that day, one evening he called me and said he wants to name the new venture as Indica Classical Library and wanted my opinion. I started dancing. I said, wow, what a name. It's a brand. It's a marketable name. It's sensation. Because of something that Gauriji was already mentioning, something happened. There was an event, a sensational event. And there a huge amount of funding went to that venture. At that time, there was a lot of discussion in our circles, Indic circles. At that point, people started saying that, oh, don't we have our own people who are good translators? Why should we go only to an anti-Indic scholars group to give translations to them? And we started naming people. You see, we have this scholar, we have this translator, we have this translator, and all that. So those names now have to come. Now we have created a forum, we have created a platform. So that listing of names that happened at that stage should not stop there. All those people who said, I'm there, I could have translated, or who said, here is a scholar who could have translated, please come now. Please, all of you come now. Please don't keep quiet. Please don't say, no, you started, you do it. It's your job. No, you said that. You said that you are there. And you said that somebody else is also there. Bring all of them. You come. Translate. We created a platform where what we wanted to do at that time, we can do now. As a teacher of linguistics, I was teaching my class on applied linguistics, particularly on that day, it was translation theory. And our friend, our own Dr. Arvind Rao Garu, on a very friendly way, he intruded into my class. He said he was going to come and he entered the class. At that point, I was teaching politics of translation to the students. And he was very happy. He said, oh, this is what I was waiting for, politics of translation. People talk about equivalence and source language, target language equivalence, semantic equivalence, aesthetic equivalence, this equivalence, that equivalence, all those things. But I never heard this word, politics of translation. Yeah, interesting word. And that is what we are for here. We were responding to a politics of translation when we were talking about a particular funding going to a particular unit. As probably most of you know, there was a stage, there was a platform called Clay Sanskrit Library. And the scholars who shifted to this new classical library that was created were originally funded in that unit, Clay Sanskrit Library. And the Clay Sanskrit Library started losing funding. The funding stopped. And the scholars who were on the board, on the panel of this Clay Sanskrit Library, they were waiting for an alternative funding. And it was at that time that a young man, the son of an affluent investor in India, he was impressed by his teacher there. It was not even a teacher, he audited a class of Shabara Bhashya by this controversial Indology scholar. And he got so impressed that immediately he committed to a huge amount of money. And we all know the whole story later, controversy about that. And in an email forum that we are all in called Bharatiya Vidvat Parishad, there repeatedly were discussions about the correctness of these translations, problems with those translations. One of them was on the Ramayana translation by one Professor Robert Goldman. And the issue was brought in by Shri Nityanand Mishra ji. And when he brought in that issue for discussion, he was mentioning for comparison the Gita Press translation of Ramayana. And he was trying to show how Gita Press translation of Ramayana has the insider perspective compared to Robert Goldman's translation. He was pointing out issues with the Robert Goldman's translation right from the very beginning. For example, Kritagnyascha. At the level of Kritagnyascha itself, the word Kritagnya itself has been translated by Robert Goldman in a way that is not acceptable to a traditional insider. He brought in. Actually, it is interesting that Sri Nityanand Mishra ji originally had a very great opinion about Robert Goldman's translation, but gradually began to realize the problems. We have an interview by Sri Rajiv Malhotra ji with Nityanand Mishra ji about such translation problems and all that. At that point, one thing that came out was the Gita Press translation price-wise is cheaper, approachable to all Indians. They can easily buy. It's a charity, so they priced it very low, and it was very much available. But still, if at all people were preferring Robert Goldman's translation, it was because of a foreign name attached to it, an American scholar translated. Probably that adds a value to that translation. At that point, we were discussing, even earlier to this, we were discussing how in Robert Goldman's translation, in a footnote, his wife's name was also there in the discussion. In the footnote, he was mentioning how Hanuman's expansion in size is actually a release of an imploded sexual energy because of celibacy. A celibate controlling his sexual energy symbolically in a Freudian way, it was being shown in the form of the bigger size of Hanuman was the argument there. At another place, there was this Hanuman inside Ravana's Antapura, and Robert Goldman says that there is Shringara in that instant. Any Alankara Shastra student, knowing at least the basics, would know that the rasa that is to be discussed at a certain point has to be discussed on the basis of the viewer that is being discussed. That is, he is the Alambana Vibhava. Hanuman is the Alambana Vibhava of the Bhava. Rati. If Rati is the Sthayi Bhava, and the Sthayi Bhava Rati is there in Hanuman, then only there can be Shringara Rasa in that incident. And we are talking about a Brahmachari. We are talking about Hanuman, in whom there is absolutely no possibility of Rati as a Sthayi Bhava and he being Alambana Vibhava. And from where is the Shringara Rasa there? From where is it coming? And we, at a certain point, when we talk about this, people talk about the hard work behind these translations. Yes, it is true that these translators worked very hard to bring out these translations. They invested all their energies, their scholarship. They worked hard to learn Sanskrit also, and there lots of experience, decades of experience in learning Sanskrit and teaching it is also admirable. That's all wonderful, right? But if a student of Sanskrit, knowing at least the basics of Alankara Shastra, is completely put off with this kind of Shringara Rasa being shown in that incident and being Freudian interpretation being given to Hanuman's larger size, growing into larger size and all that, it's not discounting the hard work of the translator. It is sharing the sentiment. It is sharing the right evaluation. It is sharing the right review of the work of a great scholar. You're a great scholar, absolutely. No doubt about it. You work very hard to learn Sanskrit. But what is missing here? If there is a motive attributed to these mistakes in translation, that could be conspiracy theory. Maybe, may not be, we do not know. But when these translators say that their target audience are Western audience, they very clearly say that. They very clearly say that the target audience of all translations are people who are not brought up in Indian culture, who do not understand anything about tradition of India or something. It is all Western brought up audience, Western culturally completely deep audience. So we are targeting them. Okay, fine, but what is happening is the NRIs, Indians living abroad also, are then going to these translations thinking that these translations are done by great scholars of universities. So they are senior scholars of a university. They learned Sanskrit very well. They command Sanskrit greatly and all that. And if those NRIs are deeply rooted in our tradition, they are sure to get put off by these so-called mistakes in translation. Whether they are mistakes or deliberate, that is a different thing. But if they are deliberate, this is politics of translation. If they are not deliberate, they are the lacunae on the side of the translator. They are misfit as translators. They are not eligible. They are not qualified to be translators. So what at that point people started realizing is that instead of simply pointing out these mistakes, we should come up with a solution. We should be able to show that, see, this is the alternative. We are providing you the alternative. And there were actually, Indica Academy was already funding some kind of translations, for example, from KSRI. KSRI was bringing out some critical editions. Along with critical edition, they were doing some English translation also. And we were about to fund some other translations also from Indica Academy. So Sri Harikiranji thought, okay, why not we bring a totally new platform and call it Indica Classical Library, and then provide a platform where we can tell people that instead of simply pointing out the problems with the translations from people who are not deeply rooted in Indian tradition, we can show that we have an alternate translation. And it was Sri Megh ji who came up with this idea of RET, viable solution, an economical solution, where instead of spending time, energy, money on a fresh new translation all the way, we can simply point out the problems in the existing translation and provide only the corrections, correctional translations, remedial translations. This is Sri Harikiranji and myself thought wonderful solution. It's a great solution given our resources also. So it's a kind of a review, it's a kind of a feedback also, and we are providing an alternative also. But the Natya Shastra contract that is signed up now is a completely new translation. It's not a remedial translation. But some translations that are signed up now and that are in the pipeline are remedial translations also. So those among the audience, if you are ready for any of these things, actually we have an idea that we can even crowdsource ideas for translations. Crowdsource your own observations about the wrong translations that you have noticed. Crowdsource not just a list of books that we could translate, just some points, even one shloka from a book. You can say that this shloka is wrongly translated. I have a problem with this translation. We can crowdsource all those ideas at one place, and then we can go for. You may even point out a translator if you know. You can say, sir, I found this problem with this shloka. This is the shloka and the English translation. And I also know a scholar who can better translate the shloka or a line from a commentary, from a bhashya, from a vyakya, somewhere. Then we can list all of them. We can create a pool of all these issues and translators, both. A pool of issues, pool of translators also, and then create a plan for rectifications, remedial translations, and we can go for Sri Meghji is negotiating for a Rigveda translation, first mandala translation also. I think it will be crucial very soon. And we have many other crucial classical works in the pipeline. For us, classical works include Rigveda also, not 3rd century BCE or 250 BCE. So we, in the pipeline, we have many translations waiting, and definitely we will create an Indic alternative for the translations where either the inefficiency of the translator or a wrong political motive on the part of the translator exists. We will correct both. That is our goal.
Right.
So with this, I'm very, very glad I should share that the Indica Academy umbrella is enriched by this Indica Classical Library wing, and the leadership from Sri Meghji, the dynamic, ever young, ever creative, perpetually aggressively creative. Sri Meghji is leading this unit, and we are hopeful of lots of productivity in the unit. And very soon, probably, India and the world is going to see a viable alternative in terms of translations and, if necessary, critical editions of our classical works. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Srinivas.
Thank you so much, Nagarajji. It's a team effort, and all of us will need to lead this together to make sure that we can come out with whatever we have in mind. But thank you so much for actually elaborating on certain very specific aspects and also giving a view on what is upcoming and breaking it down in terms of some of the issues that we're looking to deal with. So that's great. Thank you so much. I'm mindful of the time. It's 11:06 right now. I know people in USA particularly must be sleepy. So can we just take 10 more minutes if that's okay? We'll get a perspective from a scholar who's actually signed up, which is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, to start with, and then get there are a couple of questions at least, and one person who wants to share a view that I see in the chat box. Is that okay, Harikiranji? Can we take 10 minutes more? Okay, I'll take that as a yes. So I'll invite. So Vinayak, if you're there, I'd really like you, without giving away which exact version of Arthashastra that you're looking to translate, because without giving that away, if you could just share your experience so far, I think that would be great.
Thank you, Meghji. Pranamami Sarvan, and I would like to thank Meghji for inviting me to speak in the arena of such eminent scholars who are very rare to visit. Vidusham Sangaha Labhaya Bhavati Sarvada. And thank you. This project is actually for the existing translation. We are trying to look on the existing translation and find out if there is something which is not meeting our Indic thoughts. So it is like Titirshur Dustaram Moha Dudupe Nasmi Sagaram. I and Nitinji have taken this project, but it is a big ocean and we both are trying to cross this ocean using a small boat. It's indeed a great thing to do. Initially, the methodology which we are actually planning behind this is we will be reading the original text, as well as we will be going through the 7 commentaries which have already been written on Arthashastra, like Chanakya Tika, Srimula Tika, and various other Tikas. Though all of them are not in a complete version, but still we will be looking each one of them, and we will also be referring to some parts of Mahabharata like Shanti Parva. We will also be going through Shukraniti, Viduraniti, etc. Why we want to focus on these texts is to understand what really Indic thoughts were, because Chanakya actually is taking, Chanakya is doing the sangraha of the previous Arthashastrajnas, where he says, Prithivyaha labhe palanecha yavanti Arthashastrani purvacharyaih prayuktani tani samhritya ekamidam Arthashastram kritam. So, all the thoughts which are there in Arthashastra is, most of the thoughts are basically taken from the previous acharyas. So to understand what really Arthashastrakara Chanakya wants to say, we must understand these versions. Also, as I am from the Vyakarna background, it will be really interesting for me to come up with the various etymologies of the words. Chanakya is coining some very new words which is not being used in Laukika Samskrita Bhasha. There are many words which, and the way samasa is a compound word. The compound word which he is using can have 3 or 4 different vigrahas. I don't exactly remember one of them, but when we were discussing, I and Nitinji were discussing, we got 3 or 4 such places where just by changing the compound, the meaning itself changes. So there are possibilities that because of this, seeing the compound words in only one way, the meaning would have differed. So we are also focusing on that, and we will be trying to come up with the version which suits our Indic thoughts. And thank you all, especially Harikiranji and Meghji, who felt that we can do this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vinayak. It is also, I see it as a sign that our first contract has Vinayak in it, which is a Sri Ganesha for our entire project. So I think he spelled out the methodology in a fairly lucid way, and I'm really looking forward to the output. We actually have a structured way to measure it over time, and it's all tied into our new contract. So great, Vinayak. Nitin, for the shortage of time, I'm not inviting you to speak on this right now, but I know that you're with Vinayak in every step. And in another forum, we would love to hear your views as well. I'm just quickly now going through some of the questions which are there. And there's one speaker, I think, who's requested, Sahishnu Bhattacharya. He's requested for a few minutes. And Sahishnu, we'll have to make it really short, maybe a minute or two. But after I answer some of the questions. So Vijay Raghavan has asked,
you were asking me something?
I was asking if we had 10 minutes more at that point of time, and decided we'll go ahead. So Vijay Raghavanji is asked, when can we expect to have a translation of Manusmriti? So Vijay Raghavanji, I don't have a pat answer in terms of a date right now, but what I can tell you is it's certainly in the list of things of our priority list. As you might appreciate, we have right now a set of criteria that we use, which would evolve over time to prioritize the resources that we have. And from a narrative point of view, Manusmriti, of course, is extremely important. I don't have a pat answer right now, but other than saying that it is very much in our focus, and hopefully we'll be able to announce something new on that. Subsequently, somebody has been spamming saying good video maker. So I'll ignore that. So there's a question, sir, what would happen in Indic library? I think that has been answered. Rajiv Srinivasanji is here. Thank you so much, Rajiv ji. He's asked a question. He said, awesome logo. Is it copyrighted? I'll request Hari Kiran ji to answer that question on the copyrighted part of it.
No, not yet.
Not yet. So that's the answer on that. And library would consist of only translation or even of scientific work in them. So this is a question, it's saying only translation or scientific work. I don't think we need to see them that way. I think we should see if there's a text which is scientific, and if it's in a language that could use a translation, then we would be open to that. For instance, if you take, I'm not saying we are doing this, but to take another chronologically significant example, Vedanga Jyotisha, for instance, is conservatively dated to the 2nd millennium BCE, early 2nd millennium BCE. Now, that has several aspects which one would consider scientific. So there's nothing that stops us from taking that up if it meets certain other criteria that I said is evolving. So I hope I answered that question, that we won't be limited that way. Finally, yeah, there are some good wishes. Thank you so much for that. Now, Sahishnu wrote a very long and thoughtful email yesterday. He's also a participant in BVP. So if his microphone can be enabled for a couple of minutes, Sahishnu, you could just add your views, and then I'll hand it over to Hari Kiran ji to close this. I hope I've not missed anything else. Sahishnu Bhattacharya, could you raise your hand so that Srinivas ji can enable your microphone?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. So I'll just keep it very short. My namaskar to all the eminent scholars here. There are these 3 issues I want to point out, that in your objective, there was a need for decolonized translations. And in my work as part of hermeneutics and of the Western episteme in general, I have found 3 important problems that need to be kept in mind. Number 1 is the problem of translation. The very notion of a translation is itself a Western idea. So there is always, find the tendency to separate one text, and then the bhashya is separated away as if it is a dilution, as if it is the ideology of the bhashyakar who has imposed their own meanings. So these sort of things need to be kept in mind. So I believe Professor Kuradaji has elsewhere spoke of this, that the Shastras need to be seen holistically, that without that context, that text can't ever be understood. So that's one important point. The second is the problem of...
Is there a disturbance in your background?
Sorry?
Is there a disturbance in your background? There is some disturbance that is coming.
Yes, dear, there was a procession going by. I'm so sorry. Should I say it again?
No, it was audible. Continue. Yeah.
Okay.
But there was a disturbance. Yeah.
It's just that the when we do the translations, we should take into the idea that it should not necessarily be one-to-one, one text to one, but also taking into context the pravaha of the Shastras, the immensity of the bhashyas and the tikas that have accumulated. The received tradition should be given more importance than only selecting one strand of a text and saying this is the primary and everyone just added their own opinions. The second is that of the problem of curation. Sometimes this problem was raised and talked about here, is that what defines classical? The most of the Western thought has seen classical as a chronological idea, something debounded by time. But as Professor Kuradaji said, that we are often neglecting the Yogaja Pratyaksha, the very idea that something may be authored as...
Okay, we seem to have lost you, Sahishnu.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I'll request you to keep it brief. Go ahead. Yeah.
So it's just that the idea that classical need not be a chronological term from the Indica Classical Library's perspective, but that the wisdom that has flowed throughout the millennia here can be something that goes as far as back as the Rig Veda, as well as something that goes back only up to 200 years. It's the wisdom that is classical and not the text itself. That's the logocentricity of the West. And the third problem is that of discontinuity, that whenever we talk about the Western idea of critical translations, we talk about removing illogical ideas, but critical also sometimes covertly implies the deliberate imposition of a difference where there isn't a difference, sometimes forced discontinuities. So sometimes you see that scholars placing divisions like this is Hindu and this is Buddhist, but when it goes into the deep depths of the sadhana, you see that they're all merging into the same ocean. And we see that there is continuity, but that it becomes a problem of methodology. So these are some of the points I just wanted to highlight. And I think that this is a great enterprise that we have started, and this is a momentous point in Indian history. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Right. Thanks, Sahishnu. I'll just have a very, very brief, within 30 seconds response to the 3 points. I think Vinayak addressed the fact that how they would not be looking only at the text, but also looking at the bhashyas, and therefore approach it as holistically as we can. In certain cases, that might be possible. In certain cases, that one-on-one might be hard to exit. But I think Vinayak has already indicated how we will think about it. When we think about classical, certainly it is not Indica Classical Library's position to think only chronologically. The point that we belabored was that we will not have chronological limits. But at the same time, if you look at other definitions of classical, typical dictionary definitions, there is a quality dimension to it, there's a time dimension to it, there's a space dimension to it. So we will certainly be open to all of these three. And as regards your third point, that is also factored in, and we will make sure, but these are good points to think about, certainly. So I appreciate you foregrounding all of these. So thank you for the engagement. It's good to hear people come so prepared with these points to this discussion. So that I think also shows the interest this initiative is generating. And we hope to have more people like these. So with that, I'll hand it over now to Hari Kiranji for his final closing views, unless I've missed something else. Yeah.
No, you carry on. You can conclude.
Okay. So is there anything else? If there's anything else that any of our panelists, particularly any of our advisory board members want to add, we could take that. Otherwise, given in the interest of time, I'd like to once again thank everyone who has taken time out today to be here. Some who signed up but could not make it over here, but showed your intention to signing up. We need the active support of each one of you over here for this to find enough momentum so that when we visit next year, this same project, maybe on the same date, we would have something substantial to show in terms of the output. So we will need all your good wishes and blessings. Kurada Subramaniam ji has his hand up, so I'll request Kurada ji's views.
Just only one thing, see, throughout in this classical thing, Vedas are not dated. Vedas are Nitya. They have been there. And people are saying 3000 BC, something, this thing is clearly stated in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So if anybody comes, okay, with such kind of proposal that Rigveda belongs to such and such a Veda Kala, they say, Rigveda Kala has become a very bad habit. I could not tell time and again to people, so I kept mum. So please see that Vedas are Nitya. It is our tradition. It is there in Vedas itself. We have a lot of proof. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, Professor. We will be very careful in adding any particular year, and we will make sure that it is qualified if we do so, so that it is. So that's an pet area of interest for me as well. So we will make sure that at least the sufficient disclaimers are presented over there. On that note, I think we will end this session of blessings from our advisory board members, some interesting points from some of the participants, and of course the vision and the goals which Harikiran ji emphasized and Nagaraj ji kind of added to it and expanded in terms of some of the detail. So on that note, thank you again. And I look forward to an active, involved participation. Please write to us. Our email addresses are there on the website. We'll go visit our website. Please keep a track of what's coming out and keep your ideas flowing in. Thank you. Jai Hind.